Hi everyone, my name is Cody Rue, and this is the Church of Logic. I'm again with Phil Zucker,
Hello.
and I never know if it's Zucker.
I have a rhyme for it, but I don't know if it's appropriate for.
Alright, well, I knew this was going to happen eventually. Okay, anyway, last time we talked about SAT. It was great. We explained the problem. Basically, Phil had a really nice characterization, which is, hey, take a circuit that takes in, booleans or wires as input and returns, 0 or 1 as output, and run it backwards. Say, hey, I know I have a 0 as output. Give me an input that leads to that 0 or that leads to that 1. So this is a really nice characterization. And we also mentioned there are many other useful things you can do with such an algorithm that manages to do this. And we also mentioned there are practical tools that actually try and take in Boolean formula, say, and give you a satisfying input for that Boolean formula. And those are really perfected and optimized. That's kind of cool. And we also mentioned, again in passing, that if you do the naive thing of just try all the possible combinations of inputs, see if that gives you the right output, that's going to bring pain very quickly because it increases exponentially, and so really you immediately run out of resources. So how does one solve this problem? I actually saw a talk, I think, by I forget it, but I think it was Hillary Putnam who was talking about coming up with this algorithm for solving SAT. And originally I think they had written a proposal that involved trying to find an algorithm to prove arbitrary first order logic formulas, which seems crazy. And they brought this to some agency they'd never heard of, which was the NSA. I can say the spoiler right now. And the NSA was like, okay, well, why don't you try solving this easier problem first? And for some reason, in, 1963 or something, they were really interested in this problem of trying to find assignments to Boolean formula. And so, yeah, him, Martin Davis, and, Loveland, and, I better look this up. I mentioned this algorithm. I should look up who the creators were.
DPLL. I'm trying to figure out what the last L is.
It's Lodgman and Loveland. And they came up with an algorithm, which we're going to try and describe in a few words. And this algorithm was already sort of more clever than the original kind of trial combinations algorithm. And then over the last 50 years, people have come up with more and more clever ways to optimize this algorithm and have cool heuristics that work in very useful cases. And today, we're at a point where if you can turn your problem into an instance of this SAT problem, you're in pretty good shape. You have a real chance of being able to just run this and solve your problem. So okay, let's describe the problem a little bit. I'm going to try and explain the first step, which is conjunctive normal form. Basically, if you have a Boolean combination, you have nots and ands and implies, and you want to turn that into this very well-structured problem. And this isn't always necessary for these fast algorithms, but usually these algorithms just take this kind of thing as input, and they do it because they're super optimized for this particular structure, and it's a relatively simple structure. So there are some things that become easier when you have this shared language. And basically the shared language is you want to take this Boolean formula and turn it into a formula of a particular form, which is a top-level conjunction, a big and, of a bunch of ors, right? So if you have, an example of a conjunctive normal form would be A or B and C, right? And at the leaves, you can have negations, right? So you can have not A or B and C or D, right? And so what's kind of cool is Yeah, you want to find a satisfying assignment, and that basically means you have to find an assignment that satisfies each of the individual conjuncts. And for each of those conjuncts, you need to satisfy at least one of those disjuncts. And then the disjuncts are either an atom, so you can just assign true to it, or the negation of an atom, so you can just assign false. And this sounds impossible, but actually there are algorithms that take in a SAT problem and turn it into a different SAT problem with the same, or rather a superset of the satisfying assignments. And those algorithms are efficient. I'm not going to explain them, but they are efficient. So there's a way to just turn this problem into this conjunctive normal form, which really exhibits kind of a simple structure. And I can go on, but maybe if you have insights about DPLL, you can jump in here.
I guess I just want to comment that there's a really cool history of sort of the early history of automated reasoning, which we're talking about the late 50s, early 60s right now. And conjunctive normal form is almost like the bedrock of the field or something. That obviously you want to work in conjunctive normal form, but that was a discovery or an insight at some point. And there were certain algorithms that work, for example, with disjunctive normal form. It isn't obvious that you want conjunctive normal form. It's just that it is particularly suited for this algorithm. I think it's not entirely obvious. It's a little formal. This idea that you can. I mean, it's very much related to. We're used with it. We learn algebra in high school, and we learn that you can expand polynomials into a form, or you can FOIL stuff out, right? You can turn something into a big sum of a bunch of multiplicative terms, and what we're describing is almost the exact opposite of that, where really and is kind of more like multiplication and or is more like addition. So we're sort of describing multiplying something out into a giant product of sums.
Yeah,
but
kind of
it because it's in Boolean logic, actually products and sums aren't quite as different as they are in ordinary algebra.
That's a cool point.
And so there are these notion of normal forms, and this expanding out is one way of doing it. It's actually not probably how you should do it in the case of actually converting a CNF. There's better CNFs you can get than doing this giant multiplication out, which actually might be kind of a problem. Explode your thing. Just like when we FOIL it explodes out a huge polynomial.
All great points.
Yeah. So, why? All right. So we're in CNF. We're in this giant and of ors. And now some of these things might just be an or of one thing. If it's just and C, like you mentioned that example before, you have C and then some other stuff. Well, now C, since it's anded with everything else, if we need to make that whole formula true, that C has to be set to true now.
Right.
So that's kind of an important property of CNF, that it expands it to these independent pieces, that once there's a single thing in one of those clauses, you know exactly what you need to turn that thing into.
Right. It's called a unit clause.
Right.
And as Phil mentioned, you know what you need to send that clause to. You need to make that atom true. And so, if it's C, you set it to true. You set C to true. If it's not C, you set C to false. And now, all those C's that appear elsewhere in some of these other clauses, so you have C and A or C, right? You set C to true, but it's everywhere set to true. So that and A or C, now it's A or true, which is just A. And now, hey, guess what? You have a new unit clause just because you've set C to true. A is, again, a unit clause, and you set A to true, right? And now you're done, right? You can keep doing this recursively. And
the particular example you just said was A or true, which evaluates true.
Nope. Sorry. Yes, it does. And A or true.
Not to derail.
Right. That's fair. I'm sorry. You can delete all the clauses that have C, but if you have C and A or not C, right?
A or not C.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good point. And while we're making side points, you cannot use DNF for SAT solving, right? Because DNF is already kind of solved.
Is that right?
Yeah. So a DNF would be A and B or C, right? I can tell you exactly what the satisfying assignments to that are.
Okay, so maybe the thing I'm remembering, just to make sure that I can never be wrong by explaining when I was wrong, why I'm not wrong. Maybe the algorithm I'm referring to is like finding that expansion of DNF. Then you can just read off whether it's sad or not.
Yeah, that's a perfectly correct algorithm.
Probably
but unfortunately, it's a horrible one. Yeah.
Early days.